Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we go ahead and start the lesson, let's go ahead and start with the prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for the chance to be here today to study your word, to learn more about your nature and about the order you have set up for us, and to learn from the history of the nation of Israel. We pray that you will be honored and glorified in this, and that everything we say and do here today will be pleasing in your sight. In your son's holy name, amen. So, hello everybody. This is my first time teaching at Westside. My name is Adam Kelso. If any of you don't know me, I am a software engineer by trade. I have a beautiful wife here as well, and then two beautiful little daughters. And I'm excited to be teaching for the first time here. Okay, so we're going to continue our study through 2 Samuel right now, starting in chapter 15. As we've seen so far, there is a lot that has led up to this point. So first, we're going to have an opening question. I like to start each of my lessons with a question, just to get us having thoughts throughout that are going along with the lesson. Have you ever faced a time of severe disappointment or embarrassment or grief, only to look back and realize you had no one to blame but yourself? Now, I don't want anybody to answer this, but it's just to get our minds thinking here. I certainly have, and I bet most of us do as well. And David is going to be having one throughout these chapters as we go forward. Okay, so a quick review over what we've seen so far. In chapter 12, God sends Nathan to rebuke David for his affair with Bathsheba and having Uriah killed to cover it up. Specifically, in verses 11 and 12, he says, "This is what the Lord says, out of your household I am going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will lie with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel." So very condemning prophecy that Nathan gives. And then we start to see it come to pass. In chapter 13, Amnon rapes his half-sister Tamar, and both of these are children of David. And then Absalom then murders his half-brother Amnon to avenge her, and then flees to Geshur. So huge calamity that is coming to the nation and also the house of David. In chapter 14, David really does nothing about all of this so far. In either situation, until Joab, using a lie, convinces him he needs to bring his son back from Geshur. But even after he comes back, for more than 2 years, Absalom never receives any real punishment. So setting a bad precedent on this. All right, so just to give you a map here that's going to be useful going forward, we're going to have a few maps throughout this today. The land of Geshur was in the northeast of Israel on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. Or Lake of Galilee, depending on who you ask, just so you know. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start reading. I'm not a fan of reading all of these chapters myself, so I'm going to offer anyone who's willing to read, you can have a microphone and read a few verses at a time. I will give you warnings if there are a lot of complicated names, though. So is anybody willing to read the first 12 verses? Okay, Ty, thank you.
And it came to pass after this that Absalom prepared him a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man had a suit which should come to the king for judgment, then Absalom called unto him and said, "What city art thou?" And he said, "Thy servant is of one of the tribes of Israel." And Absalom said unto him, "See, thy matters are good and right, but there is no man deputed of the king to hear thee." And Absalom said, "Moreover, oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man who hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice." And it was so, that when any man came nigh to him, obeisance, he put forth his hand and took hold of him and kissed him. And on this manner did Absalom to all of Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. It came to pass at the end of 40 years that Absalom said unto the king, "I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed unto Jehovah in Hebron. For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode at Geshur in Syria, saying, If Jehovah shall indeed bring me again to Jerusalem, then I will serve Jehovah. And the king said unto him, Go in peace. So he rose and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as ye hear the sound of the trumpet, then ye shall say, Absalom is king in Hebron. And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were invited, and went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, even from Gilo, while he was offering the sacrifices. And the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. And there came a messenger to David, saying, The heart of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto all his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, Arise, and let us flee, for else none of us shall escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us quickly, and bring down evil unto us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servant said unto, is that good?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. So far, we are seeing that Absalom, having no real burden or any punishment for what he's done, he either is power hungry or he is, actually he's definitely power hungry. He is also not afraid of his father now because he's murdered his half-brother and had no repercussions for it. So he is clearly trying to build up goodwill with the people. It was interesting, I noticed when Ty was reading, his version said that it was 40 years he went on. Depending on which translation you have, they'll say either 40 years or 4 years. I think it's definitely 4 years because David only ruled for 40 years total. So yeah, that doesn't really match up mathematically. So there was a clerical error that was in early manuscripts apparently. So just a heads up on that one. But anyway, along those lines of Absalom is trying to aggrandize himself, trying to woo people into his way of thinking. He's playing a long ploy of charm and discrediting his father. Now remember, in a previous chapter, it was said that he was the most handsome man in all of Israel. From his head to his toe, Absalom had no blemish whatsoever. And so he's using this to this ability to have charisma and charm to win people over, away from his father. So if it's 4 years long, there's no way David didn't know this was going on. If your son is out in the public saying, well, I'm sorry, but there's no judge to handle your case. You're valid, but there's nobody to handle it. If only I was a judge. You don't think after 4 years David would have heard about that? So there's no way he didn't know about this. So there's a couple of things going on here. Either he's not doing his duty and telling his son to either be quiet or fulfilling these judgments, or he's unable to do so. The Bible doesn't really stipulate what happened here on exactly which case it is, and it may be a mixture of both. Whatever extenuating circumstances, we don't exactly know. So, more and more people are facing injustice or not getting the justice they feel they deserve, and Absalom is just playing on to that. So he's making a network of followers and schemers. Okay, so going through the next section here, I'm going to go ahead and read this just because there's a lot of names that are difficult, so we're going to run through with that. But just to give you a heads up also on this map here, when he says he was heading to Hebron, Hebron is south of Jerusalem, and it was a couple of days' journey if you were not riding hard, if you were just walking normally. One more thing to notice also, it says in verse 1 that he got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men. There's a few things to remember about this, is that is directly in violation of what is written in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, God actually tells people the future kings of Israel don't amass horses. And the reason why is that horses were a military might, were showing of military might. And God wanted to not show or have Israel rely on him for all these military military incursions and different things like that. So the Israelite army was odd in that they didn't usually have a lot of horses. They usually were all on-foot infantry, which is one of the most vulnerable types of infantry out there. But God was doing that to show, hey, I am with you, I will fight for you. And even though these other armies have chariots, especially because Egypt was known as the land of horses. If they wanted to get horses, they would have to go back to Egypt or to work with Egypt. And God was saying, no, you're not going back. So all that in mind, that Absalom not only had horses, he's flagrantly flouting the law that it was set forth in Deuteronomy and the other parts of the Pentateuch. But at this point, since he already murdered his half-brother, I guess he doesn't really care. So knowing that going forward here. Okay, so we're going to go through chapter 15 here, verses 13 through 37. A messenger came and told David, "The hearts of men of Israel are with Absalom." Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin upon us in the city to the sword." The king's officials answered, "Your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses." The king set out, and his entire household followed him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. So the king set out with all the people following him, and they halted at a place a distance away. All his men marched past him, along with the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and all the 600 Gideonites who had accompanied him from Gath marched before the king. Just a quick thing here on leaving the concubines. It was normal in this time period when a king was conquered by another that his harem would be taken over by the new king or new royalty that came in. And generally, they were just held in as a trophy. They weren't harmed, but they were just held as a trophy, and David is expecting this to go forward. The king set out, got that one? Okay, verse 19. The king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why should you come along with us? Go back and stay with the king Absalom. You are a foreigner, in exile from your homeland. You came only yesterday, and today shall I make you wander with us when I do not know where I am going? Go back and take your countrymen. May kindness and faithfulness be with you." But Ittai replied to the king, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it means life or death, there your servant will be also." David said to Ittai, "Go ahead, march on." So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and the families that were with him. The whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the desert. Zadok, who was there too, and all the Levites who were with him were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. They set down the Ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. Then the king said to Zadok, "Take the Ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see his dwelling place again. But if he says, 'I am not pleased with you,' then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him." The king also said to Zadok the priest, "Aren't you a seer? Go back to the city in peace with your son Ahimaaz and Jonathan, son of Abiathar. You and Abiathar take your 2 sons with you. I will wait at the fords in the desert until word comes from you to inform me." So Zadok and Abiathar took the Ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. But David, continuing up to the Mountain of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads and were weeping as they went up. Now David had been told, "Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom." So David prayed, "O Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness." When David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. David said to him, "If you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, 'I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant,' then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their 2 sons, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear." So David's friend Hushai arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. Okay, so a lot is happening in this section right here. First off, David is forced out and leaves with his 10 concubines behind. Ittai is offered release, but he worships God and chooses to serve David. Something to note here, as far as I can tell from different resources I've read, Ittai was a former Philistine, but David still calls him a foreigner. Now, remember in the Pentateuch, in the first few books of the Bible, someone could become a naturalized citizen of Israel. It means they renounce all of their previous nationalities and they become an Israelite for all intents and purposes. This is not what's happening here, though. David says you are a foreigner and you just came yesterday. Now, it may not literally be yesterday. It may be kind of an axiom, kind of how we say the other day. And that could be some kind of reference to the past. It could be any number of time, but it's still fairly recent. And so David is offering, hey, you don't need to fight this battle. But Ittai is saying, I serve the one and only God, the God of Israel, and I'm going to serve you, who are the king, the anointed king of Israel. And so David allows him to stay with him. Now, I can't help but notice that there is definitely, if you listen to any teachings or lessons that I give, a lot of times I say, our God is a God of patterns. I don't think it's a mistake that this happens, that a non-Israelite is grafted in by the king as they're walking towards the Mount of Olives. I just don't think that's a coincidence. I definitely think it is definitely an illustration and a parallel for what happens later on when Christ is around the Mount of Olives and the whole crucifixion starts. So, one of those cool things that if you're not looking for it, you may not see it, but that is an amazing time when somebody who is not an Israelite is welcomed in and brought into the fold. So David also has Zadok and Abiathar. So Zadok and Abiathar, they were high priests. They were only supposed to have one high priest, but Saul set up a second one, and so David's just kind of allowing them both to continue going on when they weren't supposed to be. But anyway, they're both still working with them, and their sons are working as spies as well. And then on his way out, David prays and asks Hushai to infiltrate and work against Absalom. So a couple of things to note here. Ahithophel. He was a greatly respected counselor. And in chapter 16, we're going to say that his advice was like one who inquires of God, meaning one who hears from God or has a special connection with God and has God's commands. That is how highly advised his advice was going to be respected. But you would have to wonder, why is this guy suddenly turning against David? If he had such great advice, wouldn't he be working with David? Well, turns out Ahithophel was the grandfather of Bathsheba. In chapter 11, verse 3, and later on, we find out that through his son Eliam, who was Bathsheba's father. So the reason he betrayed is never stated directly in Scripture, but it could easily be that David took her for his own and had Uriah killed, and he has never forgiven him for it. That's what I think is most likely the case. So this could explain why Ahithophel does a 180. He's given great advice so far to all the kings and suddenly has a 180 and wants to have everything against David. All right. So as David flees, we're going to find out at the end of what our reading here is, but he's going to go to a city called Mahanaim. And this is in the Ephraim area east of the Jordan River, so northeast of Jerusalem. So he's going to be heading in essentially the opposite direction that Absalom's whole horde of people are coming in. Something to note here, Mahanaim was a city of refuge. Now, if you remember back in Leviticus, cities of refuge were places that were run by the Levites, and if somebody accidentally killed someone else, say it was like a construction accident or something like that, they could flee to a city of refuge, and they would be able to live there and put in special sacrifices and different things like that. But they would have to, they could go there, and it would be a safe place where anyone who was harmed or mad about their unintended killing come after them. So, city of refuge, and that's why David is running in that direction. But he has not crossed the Jordan yet, and he's running through the Mount of Olives. A couple of things to note here also as we're going through this. So we have the Mount of Olives is going to be right on the east side of Jerusalem, right here in the middle of this map. You can see that. And the Mount of Olives, here is the modern day picture of it. It is a huge mountainside. As we're reading through, when it says they went through the Mount of Olives, depending on which early manuscript you're looking at, it might actually say the way or path of the wild olive trees. And that is still the Mount of Olives. Nobody disagrees with that, but Mount of Olives is huge, so there's multiple pathways across it. So it may have been describing an actual path over one of the summits that are going through here. And what's interesting here is if it's the one that most scholars believe, you actually went through the Garden of Gethsemane here on your way out. Again, more parallels. That was just interesting to see. Okay, so David's heart is definitely getting hit over and over and over throughout this time. So while he's running, it's going to take a couple of days to get away because you're moving on foot, you're going a long distance. So in this time, he actually writes the third Psalm and possibly the 55th, written while he is fleeing. The 55th has a lot of content that is about this, so it most likely happened at the same time. But Psalm 3, if you're reading it, actually has a header that says, written at the time when he was fleeing from Absalom. And you can see a lot of the different emotions he's going through here and the absolute and utter destruction he feels in his heart. So in Psalm 3, in verses 3 and 4, it says, "But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head. I call out to the Lord, and he answers from his holy mountain." Now, he's seen this in person a lot of times, but he's not necessarily feeling it at the moment, I'm sure. But he's reminding himself, God is there. He will protect. He will do what is right. Okay, I know I'm flying through here. I promise we're going to have time for everybody to talk later on. Would anybody like 4 short verses in chapter 16? All right, well then, I'll go ahead and read then. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. He had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. The king asked Ziba, "What have you brought these?" Or, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the desert." The king then asked, "Where is your master's grandson?" Ziba said to him, "He is staying in Jerusalem because he thinks, 'Today the house of Israel will get me back in my grandfather's kingdom.'" Then the king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." "I humbly bow," Ziba said. "May I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king." Now, who is Mephibosheth? As a reminder, this was Jonathan, David's best friend. Mephibosheth is the grandson of Saul, the king he replaced. So after David takes control, he basically handed over the entire very large estate that Saul had to Mephibosheth, as Jonathan had been slain in battle. So Ziba is the head servant of Mephibosheth. He meets David in company with gifts. He claims Mephibosheth is following Absalom. Now, we'll see later on next week that this may not have actually been true, but that's what he claims so far. And then David declares everything that he had given Mephibosheth now belongs to Ziba. Again, we're seeing all kinds of different people's greed and or experiences or decisions come out in real time here, and so there's lots of weaving threads. Starting in verse 5, as King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and the special guard were on David's right and left. As he cursed, Shimei said, get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has handed the kingdom over to you, your son, Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a man of blood. Harsh words, but can't really say he's wrong in a lot of cases. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." But the king said, "What do you and I have in common, you son of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, 'Curse David,' who can ask, 'Why did you do this?'" David then said to Abishai and all his officials, "My son, who is of my own flesh, is trying to take my life. How much more then this Benjamite? Leave him alone, let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be the Lord will see my distress and repay me with good for the cursing I am receiving today." So David and his men continued along the road while Shimei was going up the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there they refreshed themselves. All right, so we oh, sorry, and I wanted to keep going here. We definitely see that David's heart is definitely more contrite than it has been in the past. I think probably the blow from Mephibosheth was the final nail in the coffin and saying, "Okay, I deserve all of this, and I'm being brought to ruin by my own ways." Continuing on in verse 15, "Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with them. Then Hushai the Archite, David's friend, went to Absalom and said to him, 'Long live the king, long live the king.' Absalom asked Hushai, 'Is this the love you show your friend? Why didn't you go with your friend?' Hushai said to Absalom, 'No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people, and by all the men of Israel. His I will be, and I will remain with him. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve the son, just as I served your father, so I will serve you?' Absalom said to Ahithophel, 'Give us your advice. What should we do?' Ahithophel answered, 'Lie with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you made yourself a stench in your father's nostrils, and the hands of everyone with you will be strengthened.' So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he lay with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice." All right, so despite his harassment, David shows mercy to Shimei. Ahithophel tells Absalom to sleep with the 10 concubines David left and to do so in broad daylight, hearkening back to the prophecy that Nathan gave. What you did in secret, I will do in broad daylight. So why did Ahithophel say this? Strategically, there's two different things going on here. One, it shows, and like as he said, it shows the people that Absalom is now in charge. However, if you're Ahithophel and you're trying to destroy David, you probably also want to make sure that there's no reconciliation possible. You want to keep your, at the same time, he's against David, but he's also using Absalom. So he wants to make sure they can never collaborate together. So he's making sure David would never forgive his son, because this is something that nobody in that time period did. You do not take the harem of somebody else and have sex with them in public view just to show, hey, I'm better than you. So this is what happened. So again, we're seeing lots and lots of threads working together. There's Absalom, there's David, there's Hushai, there's Ahithophel, and then all these other characters along the ways, and they all have different motivations here. But let's go ahead and continue in chapter 17, and we're going to go through basically the whole thing. Ahithophel said to Absalom, "I would choose 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed." This plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. A couple of things to note here. He wants to take 12,000 men. That's symbolic. That's definitely more than they would probably need to go after David and his whole household. He's probably taking maybe a few hundred people with him at the time. 12,000 versus a few hundred, it's definitely more than you would need if God was not in the mix. If it was just two groups of people against each other, the 12,000 are going to win. And particular here also, Ahithophel is saying, I want to pick the strike force for you. I know which forces are the good ones, are the well-trained ones. Let's have them go and make a quick thing of this. And that's so it all makes sense. It would all work out very well if God was not in the mix. But then continuing on here. But Absalom said, "Summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say." When Hushai came to him, Absalom said, "Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion." Now, Hushai, remember, David told him not to come with him because he's old and is going to slow him down. So this also means Hushai has been around for a long time. He's been a friend with David, so he knows these guys. He knows both Absalom and Ahithophel and what their personality types are like. Hushai replied to Absalom, "The advice that Ahithophel has given us is not good this time. You know your father and his men. They are fighters and are as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Because your father is an experienced fighter, he will not spend the night with the troops. Even now, he is hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, 'There's been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom.' Then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a fighter and that those with him are brave. So I advise you, let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, from north to south, as numerous as the sands of the seashore, be gathered to you, with you yourself leading them into battle. Then we will attack him wherever he may be found, and we will fall on him as a dew settles on the ground. Neither he nor any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring troops to that city, and we will drag it down to the valley until not even a piece of it can be found." Quite the opposite advice that Ahithophel had. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, "The advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel, for the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom." So let's think about this. Hushai says, no, don't have a specific task force. Get hundreds of thousands of people from all over Israel to go. So Absalom liked this advice for a couple of different reasons. One, he's probably, he has delusions of grandeur already, and he has been working with this for several years now. He wants to be the one on the front lines. In Ahithophel's advice, he's like, have the task force go and do it. But Hushai knows the pride that Absalom has. And also, if you think about it, he is trying to work for David. How do we get Absalom deposed? Well, the palace is the most secure place in the entire kingdom. We've got to get Absalom out of the palace if we have any chance of taking it back over. And God, of course, in his wisdom, made this plan very good sounding to Absalom. What's also interesting here is if you're going to grab the entire kingdom, hundreds of thousands of people, that's going to take months to do. A 12,000 person strike force, if they're ready to go and they're already soldiers, it's not going to take very long. But if you're going to gather hundreds of thousands, it's going to take months to get this to go. So Hushai is giving David time to counter this, and also giving time for the spies that they have to be able to send word. So, continuing on, in verse 15, Hushai and Zadok and Abiathar the priests, told Zadok and Abiathar the priests, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I have advised them to do so and so. Now, send a message immediately and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords in the desert. Cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying in Rogel. A servant girl was there to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So the two of them left quickly and went to the house of a man in Baharium, however that's pronounced. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it out over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it. No one knew anything about it. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman answered them, they crossed over the brook. The men searched but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. After the men had gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, "Set out and cross the river at once. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you." So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set out for his house in his hometown. He put his house in order and then hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Jether, an Israelite who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the city in the land of Gilead. Okay, so lots of things happen here. Ahithophel wants the 12,000 of his chosen soldiers, symbolizes the unity of Israel, and may be loyal to Ahithophel instead of Absalom if he's the one calling the shots. Hushai appealed to his pride, and he may have had lingering distrust to Ahithophel. As much of a schemer as Absalom was, he probably saw, okay, this guy is giving good advice, but I see something going on. He seems to be grabbing at straws or at power as much as I am. So I'm going to be a little careful there. At least that's how I imagine it to be. And then word is passed back to David, and Ahithophel then hangs himself when he sees that his plan is not taken. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. Why would Ahithophel hang himself when he saw that his plan is not taken? I think it's because Ahithophel so far has shown he is a very, very good tactician. He knows that a strike force of well-trained soldiers can go in really quickly and handle the situation and keep the king safe. However, since that's not happening and there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people that are going to be taken into battle, most of them are not trained. This is going to be a disaster of epic proportions when you're going to have lots and lots of untrained soldiers going after the king and fighting. And either way, if that happens, in either scenario, whether Absalom wins or David wins, he is toast. He knows it, that David is going to hear about it if he wins and he's going to have him killed, or Absalom wins and he sees the massive losses that are incurred and he's not going to be allowed to live either way. That's my understanding. It's not stated directly, but that only makes sense, is that he sees that any chance I had at gaining power is gone now because my advice is not being taken. And we'll see later on that next week we'll see that Absalom kind of follows Hushai's advice, but not really either. He's kind of going this in-between route. But either way, the whole point of Hushai was to try to get him not to use this strike force. So that's where we've gone so far. So we've covered a lot of material here. I'm sorry that it's mostly just been me talking instead of interacting, but a couple of lessons to take forward. Like always, God ensured what he said would happen did happen. We see it throughout all of history, throughout the Bible, everywhere. David's sins caused more enemies than he probably realized. Ahithophel being one, and then Shimei, all these other people, that's just the ones that are named. You have a nation of millions of people. There's a lot of people that are probably very angry at David with how he has interacted or put himself above the law or his family above the law. Inaction, especially against his own son's actions, has ruined his reputation and many rebelled. But in the midst of that, despite the coup that is going on, God has still had mercy on David and gave him loyal followers as well, and has allowed him to escape. If God didn't want him to escape, he probably wouldn't have even had the opportunity to see what was going on before he was killed. So with that, a couple of discussion questions as we close out here today. So when injustice was common, is it understandable why many people sided with Absalom? Why or why not? And feel free to answer here if anybody wants to answer a question.
Absalom had told all these people, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to answer all your problems. I'm going to give you judgment. I'm going to take care of you. David's not doing that. And so, he won their hearts, basically. and deception.
Yeah, he was definitely using the politician's way of saying, I'm going to give you all these things. And yeah. Does anybody disagree, or do you think they should have always known David is the anointed king, we need to follow him regardless?
That's what they should have known. That's what they're telling us they knew.
Hmm.
But Israel had a history of doing what they wanted to do and speeding things up,
Hmm.
waiting on God. I was just saying that Israel had a history of speeding things up and not waiting on God. And so you have people who were willing to go with what they, besides what God told them, they were willing to go along with what they wanted and what they felt was best and to not wait on God to deal with David in his time. They wanted to take it in their own hands.
Any other thoughts on that question before we move on?
I think for sure God was going to punish David for his inaction. You can see that through the Old Testament with Eli and even Samuel. But in the end, he was going to stick with David because David did always come back, always repented, and said that he did wrong and asked for forgiveness. And so, sadly, for his own family, total chaos. They had to really kill him. And so,
Absolutely. Okay, next question is, when in positions of authority, how can we minimize other sufferings for our own failings? If any of you are, say, a manager or a business owner or end up in public office, if something you've done is a failing of some kind, hopefully none of us will ever handle some kind of situation as bad as David did, but we're all fallible. We are human. How do we make sure that our shortcomings don't make others suffer?
You take responsibility. You say, this is on me. It's not on you.
Yeah. Even God said through Nathan, what you tried to hide, I'm going to put in full view of everybody. If he had just admitted it after it happened and said, I did wrong to Uriah and to Bathsheba, I am sorry, and did some kind of penance, then I'm sure God would have forgiven him and not made. And I don't know about you, but if I was in Israel at the time, I would appreciate that much more, because there's no way people aren't going to put two and two together to realize, oh, he not only took Bathsheba, but he also had Uriah killed. And then he wouldn't have made nearly as bad of an enemy of Ahithophel or others as well. Any other ideas that people have?
I was going to say just acknowledge the fact that sometimes what you do, there's no way to avoid the suffering of others. That regardless, whatever the decision that you make, it will cause some suffering on other people sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, last question. How can we recognize earnest leadership that God approves? This can be in our own lives, this can be politicians we follow, or businesses we work with, anything. Yeah.
We have the Word, and if we're in the Word, then we know God, because God speaks to us through the Word. By knowing God and knowing His Word, and think examples of how He has dealt with people, we would come to know His will, and we can see that when people go against who and when they go against His will, identify it. But if we don't know God, or if we have a man-made image of God in our mind, then we can be easily confused by man.
Yeah. along the lines of knowing God's will or God's word, I mean, learning from stories like David's is an extremely good way to know what is a good leader and what is not.
I think one of the other ways is, as was mentioned, always keep an eye on God and understand God's leadership, because even though David was a man after God's own heart, God still wanted eyes on God, not just on David. And God will use good men to accomplish his will. God will use men that are partially good in some areas and not to accomplish his will. And sometimes what happens is we look at the little good that men do and get behind that man fully. And we can do it in our communities, we can do it, anywhere. But the focus is supposed to be on God, and God will use whomever to accomplish his will, and so the glory would go to him, the followership would still go to God, not to any particular man in charge.
Okay, so one more here. Okay, sorry.
Just real quick, I would say also by showing humility.
Absolutely. Okay. Last comment, if you might.
I was going to say that we have to be careful about, and I think this kind of sums up Eric, we shouldn't be trying to pick and choose and identify leaders who we believe that God has either endorsed or approved of, or that they're doing godly things. The key is that we only know what we know. People can trick and fool us into a lot of different things if we start trying to find them. We stay true and rooted to God's word, and we live our lives the way we're patterned to live, and then we allow God to address the things and deal with the things that he's going to deal with. And I think that's what allows Romans chapter 12 to work for us, is that we're not trying to pick and choose and decide who's doing what and sliding behind them, but we're staying focused on God and fulfilling his word and living our lives the way that he has set out in his word that has been delivered to us. And we allow him to say that he is going to address all of these things for these people that are hidden that we have no idea. And so that's where we get mixed up, is where we start trying to pick and choose certain people, and we don't know their hearts and their minds and all the other things that are going on.
Yes, for certain, we're not responsible for everybody else and what their hearts are. All right, thank you, everybody, and we'll talk next week. Thanks.